In this major milestone video, I'm going to show you completing the restoration of that rolling road I bought. This video sees it back exactly how it was when I purchased it, but completely brand new, reversing 60 years of wear, tear and weather. But first, it's in the wrong orientation. Look at this lunatic turning the trailer around.
It's working though.
Right, this is it folks, we're getting this thing together. We see a lot of progress in this video. First, on goes the drawbar. We're going to assemble that trailer. I kept the drawbar off for that very reason. Turning the thing in the garage has been a lot easier without it. Now, especially when I moved the rolling road back a bit. It's quite long, so there's no more turning it anymore. On goes the hitch, just a braggy 3,500 kilo hydro tow or something like that, or hydro lock. I'm not sure. On goes the brake line, actuates all 4 brakes. And this is it folks, the first roller. So I wanted to start with the back one, the one with the brake on it. But I need to put some weight over the front of the trailer first to counterbalance it for that. So this is the first set of bearings, £350 worth of bearings, just that one. First you put the shells on the outside, tighten them up. There we go, and then you tighten those 6 screws which clamp those 2 shells in the outer clamshells. Then take the centre part apart. It's got the bull race in halves, the retaining rings in half, and then the inner raceway in halves. So first of all, clean it, oil it, put it on, find where you want it to be central. Put on the clamping rings. Black on this one, they're silver on the others, shiny on the others. And then you've got to make sure the gap on the raceway is even on either side, and then tighten those clamping rings. There's a torque setting for them. Then you load the thing up with grease, as I'm doing now. I do this 9 times. On go the the rollers on their 2 half cages, which clip together with that clip there. Look, push it on, and that's it. Just push it in. There we go. And now that's clamped, and there's one on each side. And that's that, covered in grease. Then there's these felt seals which need to be soaked in oil. I used engine oil, and then pushed into the gap. And then on goes the 2 clamshell halves. You can see the oil squeezing out of the seal now as I tighten those down. I've got a little bit of Hylamar blue on there as well. And there's a torque setting for those 2. On goes the pedestal and the cap. And then the same on the far end. I've just sped this right up for you, obviously. So I've just offered that down to check left and right alignment for the second bearing, so the distances are correct. And then I can tighten that one down, torque it down, put the cap on, and there we go folks, first one's in. The exciting one is the next one. Now I'm just loading it up with the remains of the 80 grams of grease and turning it around a little bit.
The first roller is on, look at it! New bearings, super tight seals. Yeah baby!
Then I can put a bit of paint on. I promised myself I'd paint these shafts when they were on, but I don't know how much of the shaft was going to be protruding, so I'll do the painting afterwards. So I did have them oiled up, I think, so they didn't rust in the meantime. I did actually get a bit of oil paint on the bearings, but it doesn't really matter. So now the main event. This is the big roller that goes at the back with that extra bit of shaft sticking out the back of it. That's where the brake mounts. So this is a fairly major assembly job. Getting the roller in is no problem, but getting the brake on, you'll see it's quite a hard job really. So this is the front bearing, the actually constrained one. So I can put that in place and then put the back on some pieces of wood. If I put the bearing on the back, I wouldn't be able to get to the back of the brake. So I've got to assemble the brake first and then put the big bearing on where that wood currently is. So here we go, assembling the coils folks. These have taken me months to wind these coils. It's been challenging, let's say. So they've got to go on, the bolts clamp them into place, there's recesses hold them in place as well. And now I've got to just arrange them, turn them around, rotate them so I can get the wiring all in a sensible place where all the wires can reach nicely, and then use these little ceramic terminal blocks to connect all those wires together. They're just in series, you can see 2 of the terminal blocks there, look. And then bolt those down, tighten them, tighten them, tighten them. I think they're done, mate. Next, put the plate back on. Satisfying to get that back on. Now I'm peening, I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm distorting the material around those bolts so that they should not come out, even being subject to heat. And peen those ones as well. You think you got a coil pack? That's a coil pack. You know, we got the brake together. It is, of course, just placed. There's no bolts here. I got to assemble it on the actual roller, but this is for the purpose of checking the air gap. So I reached out to Telma in a few different places. I wasn't able to get anywhere, but eventually I contacted Sal in Telma in USA. Sal was very helpful. Give me loads of information on the old brake I've got here. It's 60 years old. Super helpful. Thank you so much, Sal. So this is it, the hub there. That's the central hub which holds the two discs. That's got to be bolted to the main shaft of the roller. And then I've got to put the discs on so that I can get to those bolts at the back, the 8 bolts that hold the hub to the shaft. Then I can torque them up. So I've got it loosely attached safely now, so I can get and do these screws nicely and torque them up. Here we go, quite a big torque setting on these, but you've got to get it right, got to get them so they're tight. You'll never get to them after the bearing is on there, so it'll be a pain in the arse. So off come those bolts, and I can take that brake off because the coil goes in the middle. So here we go, folks. We are assembling the eddy current brake. This is the 100 kilos of coil pack that goes between those two discs with a rather large current flowing through it, generating an enormous, or 8 enormous electromagnetic fields interacting with the discs on the left and the right, producing eddy currents which fight the magnetic field from the coils and produce masses of resistance. This brake is spec'd for 1550 Newton meters in its original specification. I think it will now be a little less, still over 1400 Newton meters. So there's only 4 bolts that hold those two discs together. Then I drop the coil onto the disc. It's just placed there for now. This is the thing which is going to hold that coil floating in space between the discs. So this has to go on first. Then I can bolt the coil up to this spidery looking guy. Name that film. On it goes. Now I've got to get a set of bearings in there, and this is quite a task. Right, so I've cable tied bits of wood to the disc because the disc is hard mounted to the shaft, so that's fine. I'm hoping now, with that supported by the disc, I can start hammering the bearing into place. These seals need to go in first, so I'll do the seals and then start, hopefully, getting the bearing in. So this bearing, well, these are the seals. This was fairly easy, getting the seals in the back there. Get some grease on there as well. So you can see me loading this bearing up. This one came out, and it's an original bearing. I have not replaced it. It is like brand new, because it's rated for many, many tons, and it's only actually holding the 100 kilograms of coil. It doesn't see any hard work at all, no matter what car you put on it. It's not got any extra load. So these bearings went back in and cleaned them up, obviously, meticulously. This took me an hour to get just that one bearing all the way down that bore. It's like 6 inches it goes down, so it's tight on the shaft and it's tight in the bore, so it's quite a whole hour just to punch that one down. This is the spacer that holds the two bearings apart externally on their outer diameter. You can see the grease channel around the middle, which comes from the grease nipple on the outside, and then it goes to those 2 holes in the side of it and distributes grease left and right to the front and back bearings. That's not a tight fit at all. That just slots in there by hand. Look, no problem. Then the back bearing, which the spacer is spacing out against, making sure the grease channel's working, and there's some extra grease in there before I put that in. Grease that bearing up as well, and then in that one goes. Luckily this one doesn't have to travel anywhere near as far, so it took me about 10 minutes to get this one in. And then it's hard to know when the thing has stopped moving, actually, so in order to know when it stopped moving, I started measuring with a vernier calipers the distance down the bore. Did several more hammer blows and then measured it again, and you can tell when it's in because it stops moving. Obviously, the distance stops increasing. So you can see me with the calipers any second now. There we go, measuring, checking, measuring, and that's it, done. Then I can take that apart, take the cable ties off that hold the pieces of wood, and now of course the pieces of wood are really well jammed in there, so it leaves a little bit of a mark on the discs, which I later cleaned up.
All right, look at that.
Look at the child playing. So this is the retaining nut, or interior nut, which goes and holds both the bearings against that spacer in the middle. You've got to hammer the hell out of this. There's no preload, just get it as tight as you can. It doesn't put any pressure on the bearings at all. It's just holding the outers. This is the locking ring, which is for the nut, which is going to go on in a minute.
So with that outer ring clamped in, the bearings are held in place. The inner ring is what holds the bearing preload. So we're going to get this nut on here now, and this one does need careful adjustment. So I've left it now so that it's slightly slack. You can see the movement. There you go. So that I know when this nut has done its job and tightened up the bearings. I'd like to take it too far as well and feel it tighten up, and then back it off so I know I'm somewhere in the middle between loose and tight.
So in that goes, and you can see towards the end of this clip I get a piece of pen, I get a little pen mark on there, and really I'm meddling around with this for 20 minutes probably, back and forth, and I finally settled on a point where it was not at all binding, but it was not at all. There was no slack in it, you know. But it's easy to find. It's easy to find these it's easy to find where it should be, but it just takes a very long time, a lot of patience. And of course, I doubt myself, and I go back and check it again and check it again. But I'm happy doing that. I'm happy that it takes ages because I want to be certain it's fine. I want to be able to rely on this thing. You can see the pen mark there as well. Now I'm bending the little tab up. This is a retaining, like a lock nut, if you like, locks against that outer nut, but it's also a surface for the seal, which goes on in a second. The seal's going to go against that grease. It's also a surface for that seal to push against. There it is, look. So the bearing set is sealed front and back, and then this cap goes on the end of it as well, which is going to hold a bearing. The 9th bearing is going to sit on that shaft and support some of the weight of the brake. So it's supported front and back, and that'll go on in a minute. Hammer that home, and there's 8 tiny bolts, which is crazy really. The thing can take so much load, but there's these tiny little bolts that hold it. So now you can see me lifting the coil. It's just resting on its centre at the moment. Lifting it up, putting it down, lifting it up, finding a central, hanging it basically central in that up and down, in that small bit of slot that it's got.
For anyone interested, by supporting it like that and leaning it that way, the coils are all flat against that disc. So I've opened out, well, there's no gap here, and you can see there's all of the gap on that side. So now I can look at the position of this. Remember, this is the thing that's going to be holding that coil and keeping it floating between. So I've got to get that gap right now, so that half the gap is on this side and half the gap is on that side, and that's clear of the rotors. Using a couple of known 2mm thick pieces and various feeler gauges, I've been able to record the exact thickness between the mount and the coil pack. Next I've got to subtract half the thickness of that gap and come up with a load of shims to exactly suit to hold the coil in place. This could take a while. I've found washers now and had to sort of grind a few down a little to create the thicknesses I need, which are circled, and that's it, they're all ready, so I can put those in there now, bolt them up and double check that spacing with these bolts. Let's do it. Check out that time machine looking thing. That is my 60-year-old Telma retarder. Now shimmed the discs and the pole mounts. It's ready to go. It's been a lot of effort shimming that. When you torque it up, it changes the gaps either side a little bit. But we've finally got there. I guess I won't see it do that much more when it's assembled. It's such a strange looking thing. Cool, huh?
So the purpose of all that work was to get the coil exactly in the middle of the gap between the 2 discs. This is the large bearing, so this is the flipping huge, I think it's a 3-inch shaft it's on. Same deal though, just get the gaps all right, get the grease on there, clip the rollers on, and then bolt the 2 clamshell halves, if you like. I think it's called the core. Bolt those together, drop it in, make sure it's all central and happy, and then drop it down. That is a pretty major milestone, getting all that together, because it was a lot of work with all this shimming. You've got to shim the discs as well to get the gap correct, then shim the coils to get the coils in the middle of that gap. So that is a significant piece of work. It's lovely to see that working for the first time ever, I might add. The coils with the discs rotating around them. So on goes the front roller now. It's all happening nice and quick now. This is much simpler work now compared to getting that eddy current brake together. Another set of bearings to go, and the front ones, and then I slap a bit of paint on because this is the coupler. I'm about to join these 2 up, so that shaft is going to be covered up. That's the coupler there. So I just wanted to put a bit of paint on those parts first. Now I'm going to get that in place before seeing the position of the far bearing on that roller to make sure it's all in the right place and the coupler is relaxed in the position it wants to be in, not being forced, you know. So now I can tighten those bolts up. There's 6 on each side, and they just pull a piece of steel towards them and clamp the rubber. It's very much like a tyre, like a wheelbarrow tyre almost, only a lot thicker. So with that bearing in place, I can assemble that one as well, grease it, put all the parts on and drop it into its cradle, and then put the cap on. 3rd roller done, folks. And I didn't forget to put the belts on, which is amazing. That's really the sort of thing I do. Last roller going in now. This is easy again now. It's not lining up with anything else, just itself. 2 bearings done. 1 actually constrained and 1 not. And then drop that thing into position. Now put the caps on.
So I've put a ratchet across the top and measured the gap in there, look, and on all ends of the roller, here, here and here, and they're all pretty much 7mm, which is fantastic. So I'm going to say the shimming of these blocks height-wise is good. It's as I took it apart, I recorded where they were and put them exactly back. There's no slopes on any one roller, and they all match each other within a millimetre.
So time to pop the belts on now before alignment. But the way to align these is with a load of bolts. The bolts were Whitworth. They all came out, but they were rusted. They were Whitworth. So I find the cheapest way actually of getting hold of these Whitworth bolts, which is quite expensive, was to buy threaded bar and nuts. It just turned out from where I could find them that was the cheapest way. So I now have to make 16 of these bolts. Yeah, so just cut them to length and welded a nut on the end. I got another set of nuts for the locking nuts on there as well. There you go. No, they're not doing anything particularly. Once everything's tightened down, they're redundant. It's just for adjustment, initial adjustment and setup. They're not. They don't need to be very strong. Here's the last one I made with a little bit of a sharp edge on it, look, to pull some of the rust out of the threads. As you can see, look, there's a little pile of rust forming there as I wind that bolt through. So that worked pretty well actually, and with a bit of copper slip, most of them you can almost pretty much do it by hand. So, like I said, they only serve the function of aligning it now. So. First of all, put that roller with the brake on it in a sensible position. Then the one to the right of it needs to be parallel to it with the coupler relaxed. So that's reasonably easy to set up, get those in a straight line basically. Then the next thing is to use those top centre two bearings you can see to tighten the belts. When the belts are tight, then use the end two to get those rollers parallel with the ones they're next to. So with all the rollers now perfectly aligned, I can just buzz around with a torque wrench and torque all the bolts up, and that's it, the thing's on there. This is the 9th and final bearing. This one is the only one that's not brand new. It's in reasonable condition, but it doesn't actually do any rotating, so it doesn't really matter. But it's been cleaned up and reassembled.
So you've seen me put this bearing on, and as you can see, it's not actually resting on the rolling road, there's a gap. And I need it to be supporting this brake. Now you can see the coil is free to rotate here, and that is when this bearing is in use. But actually, the brake coil will be held still. This bearing's going to see almost zero rotation, while the rest of it rotates, and the bearings in here accommodate the rotation of the rollers. So I would like to get the right amount of shimming in there. I have a shim, but it's not enough, as you can see. So I'm going to measure that gap by measuring that gap at this end while this end is touching, and then moving it like so and measuring the difference with a dial indicator, as you can see here. Once I've got that, I want to measure it again in two other situations. Firstly, I want to take the rolling road off its wheels, where it's supported in the middle, and put its legs on where it's supported at the end. So it goes from a hogging situation to a sagging situation, which is how it's going to be when there's a car in it and when it's in use. Because I want this bearing to be offering the right amount of support when it's in use. The other thing I want to do is support this brake. And with my crane scale, I want to put 125 kilos of support on that, which is about half the mass of the brake. Then I know that this bearing for that weight would be supporting about half the weight of the brake, so it should be perfectly aligned.
Look, this guy can't spell relieved. Weight relieved.
So I better get cutting shims.
So there it is, a bit of shim I made up. I'm going to slap a bit of paint on it by hand. It's going to get squished anyway, but the paint should stop it rusting, even what's left of it, what doesn't get squished out when I tighten it down. So I have to lift it to get it in, which is perfect. So the gap, obviously I had to half the gap that I measured, and there it is. So I can drop it on, it pinches those shims, which means those shims are actually supporting, that bearing is supporting almost exactly half the weight of the brake, which is exactly what it's meant to do, so I'm very chuffed with that. Slap some paint on, and there it is, folks. The bearing, which is never going to turn, is fitted and complete.
Ladies and gentlemen, after a lot of assembling, 9 bearings being put together, in fact 10, 11 inside that brake. This completes the restoration of that rusty old rolling road that I bought that was completely seized. This is now exactly the same as I bought it, but completely brand new. And as a little celebration, when we see all 4 rollers turning together, the discs rotating, which they never did before because it was seized, and the coil staying still. How cool is that? How cool is that? So what remains now is to modify it, and really what's here will stay, but it's an addition of a modern control system which you've seen in a previous video, and new sensors and things, tops to go on, the legs to go on. I'm going to put a cabinet here to house all the electrics, and then I've got to sort the ramps out as well. But this completes the restoration, folks. I hope you've enjoyed it up to this point. Very exciting stuff to come. I can't wait. Stay tuned.